David Schuetz. I work for a company called Intrepidus Group. We do all kinds of web testing, mobile testing. I tend to focus, as you might guess, on iOS. We've come a long way in the last, 20, 30 years. When did that Osborne come out? In mobile devices. And when each new generation of mobile devices comes out, you typically see an increased progression in adoption as people discover these devices and start using them. First, the geeks find them, then normal, everyday people find them, then normal people who happen to be management find them, and then worst possible scenario in the world, people who are your management find them, and they come to you and say, hey, is this safe? So hopefully, that's what we'll be able to answer today. And we'll talk about general security issues, some good, bad, and ugly aspects about keeping data safe on iOS. We'll talk about the general mitigations and controls that I kind of recommend, and then whatever's left over. So iOS, the good. Several good technologies in iOS on iPads and iPhones and iPod touches and such. The first among them is the sandbox, and that's basically a kernel-level technical control. It's a mandatory access control system. It helps to isolate all the different programs and all their data from one another so that any one application cannot access another application's data. It's a little bit more restrictive and deeper into the guts of the system than a discretionary control system like Android uses. It's not quite a multi-level secure system like SE Linux, but it's very close. Another good technology that appeared in the iPhone 3GS and has been on every device since is full disk encryption. The devices use AES 256 to do some, I believe it's even hardware accelerated encryption of all the data on the actual flash devices. And the master keys, in fact all the keys on the device, are ultimately tied to specific IDs and information in the device that's actually impossible to extract. So in order to actually decrypt a disk that you've got on a device, you have to leave it on that disk. You can't just unsolder the flash chips from one device and put it onto another and try to read the data. All the various keys that you'll find and that we'll talk about throughout this talk, they're ultimately derived basically from the on-device key and then generally from the passcode as well, though it's a bit more complicated than exactly that. It's a big piece of eye candy if you want to see the full chart of how they all interact. Feature that came in, I believe it was iOS 4.0, is a data protection API, which is just a way that you can say when you're writing data out to disk, how you want that data stored. It provides an additional layer of encryption and protection on top of the default full disk encryption within the system. When you lock the device, the keys for those files are purged from memory. They don't exist in memory at all anywhere as soon as you lock the device, provided there's a passcode. But of course you're going to have to decrypt those files later. You're going to have a key somewhere. So they store a copy of the keys encrypted in a new key bag, and then to decrypt that you need the passcode. So there are multiple protections that you can apply to files. You can flag a file so that it's always encrypted as soon as you lock the device. You can flag files so that you can write to them as long as they're open. So if you're downloading a podcast or something like that and then you lock the device, it can continue to run in the background to write to that open file even though the device is locked. And then there's protect until unlock, which is as soon as you reboot the device, that data is locked. Once you've unlocked it once, then you're able to read it from then on. Similar protections apply to keychain entries. Yes?
So if you don't have a passcode on your device, do you have no file encryption and no keychain encryption?
Not as much. The keychain encryption is difficult to get at anyway unless you're on a jailbroken device, which is not to say it's impossible, but yes, those additional protections are not present if there's no passcode on the device. That's why the number one rule always is put a passcode on it.
And the files, they still have some encryption if there's no passcode?
They have the full disk encryption, so you can't take it off and move it somewhere else. But they still have, if you can get into the file system remotely somehow, if you can jailbreak a device without knowing the passcode, well, if there's no passcode, you don't have to worry about jailbreaking it. You can just pull the data off anyway. As I was saying, there's similar protections for the keychain entries, and that's actually where I usually see the protect until unlock. You see that flag applied to Wi-Fi passwords. So when you reboot your phone at home, it can't connect to your home network because the password for your home network is protected in the keychain like that. As soon as you unlock it once, it connects, and then from that point on, it always has that access to that password. Another big control is the App Store itself. It's just basically a way that Apple, we all know about how Apple will screen their applications for compliance, both with their own policies and certain best practices, though it's kind of sketchy exactly how deep they go into there. Some things have slipped by, nothing truly dangerous that we know of. Of course, Charlie Miller did get something in there, but it was kind of a proof of concept. But this is a big protection, both the App Store, but also the code signing itself, that keeps programs that are on the device from running unless they have been specifically signed by Apple. And then configuration profiles. They're a way that you can configure settings on the device sort of in a big file that sets it all simultaneously. You can restrict certain features like the camera or screenshots. You can provide a known good configuration so you don't have to manually configure every device in your enterprise one at a time and worry that this one got set properly and that one didn't get set properly because you fat-fingered something. A good way to enforce your policies, strong passwords. They're still not quite perfect. There are several controls that aren't available through configuration profiles. Under certain circumstances, the user can also remove the profiles. And then, of course, managing it for the whole enterprise. How do you do that? I mean, configuration profiles are great, but if you still have to push a cart around your building and plug everybody's iPad in one at a time and load out a profile, that's still an unworkable solution for anything over 5 employees, probably. And that's where mobile device management comes in. MDM is a way to centrally manage all those profiles so that you can push them out to all the devices under your control simultaneously. You can install corporate apps, you can install App Store apps, you can remotely lock the devices, wipe the devices, etc. And MDM is a key part of maintaining these kinds of configurations for your devices. So those were the good. So what are some bad things that can be done with iOS? The user can still circumvent a lot of these policies. In general, an iOS device is still considered a personal device. Even if it doesn't belong to you, even if it belongs to your employer, it's still your device, and Apple's general philosophy still kind of gears everything towards that. So the user, even when they're enrolled in MDM and it's got all kinds of configuration profiles loaded, they can still say, I'm done with MDM, I'm just dropping out. But they have kind of a carrot and stick set up, where that anything that was installed by the MDM system, so you enroll in MDM and it pushes out a profile that's got your corporate email. If you leave MDM, then all those profiles and applications that were installed by MDM get removed as well. So sure, I'm going to leave MDM, but now I've lost access to corporate email. So it's kind of the way that they keep you in. Now, if the applications that are installed don't always, if they're not flagged to remove the data when you come out, then somebody could possibly disenroll, do what they need to extract their data, re-enroll, etc. There's a program called Configurator application, which is beginning to change how some of this works, but, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, Configurator app really isn't geared towards management of devices in an enterprise so much as a small pool like in a classroom. There are also some sneaky tricks that you can do. Desktop software is available that basically uses the iTunes protocol to communicate directly with the device, and you can easily extract data directly from the device, not just the documents folders that are exposed to iTunes in general, but even cache files and temp files and things like that from individual applications. You still have to have a passcode to get at it, or the device has to be unlocked, but you can still do that very easily. There's something called the DFU boot attacks. DFU stands for Device Firmware Update, and this was a way that you could actually boot a device off of an external RAM disk over USB. It would load up that RAM disk, and now it's not running on the internal OS. It's running off of the operating system you provided, which has been modified, so now you've got an SSH daemon. You can connect into it, get shell access to the files that way. Doesn't work on, I have iPhone 4 and above. I think I was hearing the other day that I may be wrong on this. It might be 4S. But certainly on all the new devices, that's gone away. You can also copy the device keys off of an authorized PC. When you first hook a device up to a PC to sync through iTunes, it says, oh, this is, if it's locked, say can't back up because this is protected by a passcode, unlock your device and try again. So you unlock the device, type in the passcode, and now it syncs. The next time you do it, you hook it up and the device is locked, but it still syncs with the system. That's because it copied an escrow key bag off of the device and onto the local desktop or laptop. From what I've seen so far, at least on the systems I've looked at, I don't know if the newest iTunes fixed this for Windows, but Windows and Mac, those keys are all in an unprotected space. So you can actually, if for example you have access to your coworker's machine, maybe everybody's got Active Directory logins, just something like that. You log into his machine, go to the right folder, grab the key off of that, copy that onto your machine, and now you can just simply sync his iPad to your account. There are also some ways that you can potentially provide fake responses to the MDM server. It's not an easy sort of thing to do, but it's definitely a sneaky trick, where when you enroll in MDM, you don't actually enroll your device, you enroll a script on a server that you control, and then you enroll your device into your own server and pass information back up. So now MDM messages go to your device, get forwarded to you, you proxy it back up. It's kind of a strange approach, but it is possible because of the way that MDM protocol is written, that you could get really sneaky and fool the server into thinking you're compliant with all the policies when in fact you're not. And of course there's jailbreak. Now when you jailbreak, you're getting direct access on the device to everything that's on it. It disables kernel level controls, the sandbox, the code signing, etc. Which is great if you're a hacker and you want to get in and just play with things or understand things. It's great if you're somebody like me who tries to evaluate iOS applications. But you're literally hacking into the phone. You're exploiting a vulnerability to get access. So the fact that those vulnerabilities exist in the first place is a weakness in the system. Though fortunately, the jailbreak vulnerabilities that have been susceptible to drive-bys were both fixed within 10 days each. You're also kind of trusting that the jailbreak community isn't putting some kind of rootkit into your rootkit, but so far we haven't seen that happen. Some of these jailbreaks are easy, some are hard. As I said, the jailbreak me, that was a drive-by. You just surf the website, slide a thing, and you're jailbroken. Those got fixed quick. And successive jailbreaks have been harder and harder to come by. The last one took 4 or 5 months before it came out, and then within a month, the latest iOS patch 6.1.3 has fixed that jailbreak as well. So they're definitely getting harder and harder to jailbreak. How would an enterprise protect against jailbreaks on your devices? The best protections are still coming from Apple. As I said, the two drive-by vulns were patched really quickly. Newer devices have further increased protections, like they fixed the bootware, the DFU boot firmware bug, so you can't jailbreak that way. They're just making it much harder. If you saw the talk on Tuesday from Dino Daisovi, just the attack graphs that started simple and got bigger and bigger and bigger, and to the point where he can't even fit the latest one onto a single slide because it's that complicated. That's how hard the jailbreaks are getting. So one thing people ask us about all the time is, okay, well, how do I get jailbreak detection? Why can't MDM detect jailbreak? Why can't my app detect it? There are things you can do to detect it, little telltale signs that your application can look for on the device, but you can't rely on that 100%. When you get right down to it, the device is no longer trusted. That's the whole point of the jailbreak, is you get in and do things that aren't trusted. If the device isn't trusted, then how can you trust the detection of the jailbreak? There's actually software in Cydia, which is the sort of the app store for jailbroken devices, that can spoof an awful lot of the checks that jailbreak detectors will look for. So it says, hey, are you good? And it responds, sure, I'm good, and your app carries on its merry way. And I actually had an application recently that was successfully detecting jailbreak on the iPad I was trying to test on. So I said, okay, I'll test it on my family iPad instead. And it thought that was jailbroken, and that iPad had never been jailbroken ever. So there you even had the reverse, where it thought it was seeing a jailbreak when in fact it wasn't. So it's there. I don't personally like it, but I also admit that I may be biased against it just because I use jailbreaks all the time for testing. Unintentional retention. There's actually a feature which is reasonably understood, reasonably well known, but kind of takes people by surprise. When you leave an application, it actually stores a copy of the screen contents to the device so that the next time you launch the app, it shows up that screen, it displays that screen to the user as it's paging the application back into memory, getting everything up to speed so it can run. It makes it look like it's launching faster, makes for a more seamless resumption of the application for the user. And the snapshots are now protected by the passcode. They're using that file protection complete, so as soon as you lock the device, the screenshots are encrypted. But if the device is unlocked, you can still easily extract those devices again with an app like Phone View and a USB connection. And if there's anything sensitive on those screens, then they can extract that. So if you're in a banking app and you've got your whole dashboard filled with sensitive banking information, and you leave the app and you just forget and leave the thing on your desk unlocked, somebody else can launch the app and they can't see anything because it's password protected, password inside the application. If they hook it up to something like Phone View, they can just extract what the screen looked like when you lock the app, and there's all the information. And if you're going to obfuscate, you have to do it right. The example of a banking app that's just filled with a dashboard with information actually had an app that I tested that did something like this. They actually took the screen and just put a 95% black screen in front of it. It was just 5% transparent, but everything else was black. And so I pulled that up and I said, I think I can see something there, but I'm not sure. So I pulled it up in preview. I'm playing with the levels buttons and stuff, and I noticed this auto levels button. So I touched that, and this isn't actually from the app. This is a slide from another presentation of mine. But I touched that magic button, and I could see everything just clear as day. And there's a little bit of a haze to it, but I could read every single thing on that slide. So they thought they were being clever. They thought they were obfuscating it. They weren't. If you're going to obfuscate it, just make it black, solid black, or a logo for your app or something like that. Yes? Yes. No. As long as it's not jailbroken, other apps can't access data from other applications. So yes, if your device is, even if your device is unlocked and there's sensitive information in a screenshot, it can be accessed by someone with physical possession of the device over USB, but not by other applications. And in iOS 6, they added an extended preservation API, so now you can preserve more than just what's on the screen, but this is an opt-in system. So you actually have to say, all right, this view, I want this view to be basically pickled up and saved off to the disk as an object. It can contain the contents of fields and checkboxes and views and stuff, so you need to be careful when you're looking at apps to make sure that this kind of data isn't being retained. There's also some really crazy stuff you can do to attack iOS devices. Passcode brute forcing. The way the passcodes are encrypted on the file systems or on the iOS devices, it uses a key derivation function with a variable workload, so that on an iOS, on iPhone 3GS, it takes about 20 minutes or so to brute force a 4-digit number. On an iPhone 5, it takes about 20 minutes to brute force a 4-digit number, because they've increased that workload, so it's the same workload across all the things. With the old DFU boot bypass that you could do, where I described earlier, where you could actually boot off a USB, log in with shell access, you could then brute force those passcodes, and if you had a 4-digit passcode, you could do it in 20 minutes. Again, since they've closed that loophole, you can't do that on newer devices, but that's not to say that there might be actual signed boot device bootloaders that you can use from Apple that could do that. Conspiracy theorists think there probably are. I don't know. There might be, there might not be. Either way, it's still something to be concerned about. 4-digit passcode is probably still a bad idea. There are also some forensic attacks that you can do if you have access to an unlocked device. Normal files, just general data files, can have breadcrumbs that are significant forensically, listing the Wi-Fi networks you've detected, listing some of the GPS locations you've been at, history for web searches, map searches, all your SMS logs, stuff like that. Yes? I haven't tried. I would imagine just simply, if you're jailbroken, I would imagine there's probably an easy way to do it. I haven't actually looked into that. The question was spoofing MAC addresses on a device. I'm not sure. Microphone probably didn't pick it up. But it's trivial. It is easy to do. Is it just as simple as ifconfig and a MAC address? Yes. There are apps you can download that will change it for you. So it's not just the command line ifconfig MAC equals X, but it's not far off from that. Okay, but again, it has to be a jailbroken device. Yeah, you should never use a MAC address, which is sad because MAC, the other MAC, is a good authentication method because that's a different HMAC, but that's namespace collisions. Anyway, back to forensic attacks. There's also some people have done some research where they've actually looked in file system journals on the file system and found partial encryption keys, partial or sometimes even full encryption keys that can then be used to decrypt locks on the device. So it may actually be possible doing full disk searches to recover file keys and actually even undelete some data, even beyond a disk wipe. Because when you wipe a device, it doesn't actually zero out the memory, it just throws away all the keys. Which, since everything was encrypted at the base level with a full disk encryption, as soon as you throw away that key, it's now 256 bits hard to decrypt all that data to recover it. It's essentially wiped. But if you can go through and find partial keys in the file system, that kind of brings that protection back down to a more attackable level. And then finally, again, another really sneaky thing, really crazy thing, evil-made attacks. The MDM protocol isn't a very high integrity protocol. You can actually forge messages from the server if you can interpose yourself between the server and the device. So send fake commands to the device. Under certain circumstances, you can actually resend the enrollment profile to the device, and you can have the device say, oh yes, I'm going to enroll in MDM. Oh, it's exactly what I had before. I won't tell the user I'm doing this. I'll just send a new copy of my unlocked keys to the server. And since you're not talking to the real server, you're talking to an attacker. Now he's got the copy of the unlocked keys, so now he can send a fake unlock device command to the device, and now it's been unlocked. It's kind of a long, very complicated, very difficult attack, but evil-made attacks on an encrypted laptop aren't exactly trivial either, so it's a crazy attack. I don't know if anybody would actually do it unless you're a nation state. So how do you fix these things? Ultimately, as always, it comes down to various controls. Technical controls, procedural controls. You got to be able to manage those controls. There's also commercial data vault applications, and then of course there's secure programming practices when you're creating your own corporate apps. And I'll talk a little bit about all of these. So top 6 controls. These are kind of my advice, just from the experience I've had. You go somewhere else, they might give you slightly different advice. Strong passcodes, encrypt your backup, disable Siri, etc. We'll talk about each of these in turn. Strong passcodes, I was saying before, the 4-digit passcode can be cracked in 20 minutes if you've got access to a shell on the device. So you can do the math to figure out your own comfort level as to how big you want your passcodes to be, how complex you want them to be. Obviously, a 5-digit numeric code will take 10 times as long as a 4-digit code. If you add a number or a letter to it, now you factor in 26 or 52 if it's uppercase, lowercase, etc. And again, even though the DFU attack isn't present on newer devices, it's not to say that there isn't some other way that people can get in with a signed image, or that there might be future exploits that can get in there. So it's probably still a good practice to have a strong passcode. You should also make sure that your device auto-locks quickly, both in terms of just sitting there unlocked after a couple minutes, it'll lock itself. Don't want it to go too fast because otherwise it locks while you're reading the web page. And then when you tap the sleep button, it should probably go to sleep immediately or within a minute or so. Advantages to this: increases resistance to brute force. So if somebody can get into it with a shell, they can't get at stuff. Also, the primary advantage is it ensures those data protection features, the data protection API, all those additional encryption options become available when you have the passcode on the device. Well, I should caveat that very few apps today are using that, which drives me crazy since it costs absolutely nothing to add those data protection features to your app. Disadvantage of a strong passcode: complex passcodes are a pain in the neck to enter, especially if you've got punctuation that isn't available on the first screen. If you've got to go tap, 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 and then the funny piece of punctuation, it's just a pain. If you have to do that every single time you unlock the device, it just gets cumbersome. Yes? The question was when you enable data protection with the passcode, the data protection features are it's available to any application on the device. So the apps have to actually make use of that. They have to specifically add basically an attribute to the save command. So it costs nothing from a programming standpoint. It's literally just add file protection complete to the save call. The you still get the advantage of having the device locked. Still gives you an advantage in that somebody just can't pick up a locked device and connect it to a machine as long as they don't have an escrow code. If it's ever been synced to that machine, then they've got access to it. But yes, if somebody has access to a device and a locked device and they can talk to data on the files through USB, then if the app doesn't add those data protection APIs, then yes, they don't get that additional encryption. Those will appear unencrypted to an application like PhoneView. The built-in Apple apps, I think it's still Mail is the only app that actually uses that. Some apps you can't realistically add that API to because, like for example, Contacts database has to remain unencrypted while the device is locked so that you can see who's calling you when some phone call comes in. Third-party apps, I see it now and then, but very rarely, unfortunately. Encrypted backups. There's a flag you can set when you back up your device to a desktop that says to back up encrypt the backup when you send it out. This gives you several advantages. If your desktop is compromised by malware, and who hasn't had that happen, then the data that's stored on there is still secure. It's still encrypted, and you actually require the device, the decryption of that actually has to happen on the device. You can't just simply decrypt it locally. Saves the device to the contents of the keychain, which is very useful. So all your Wi-Fi passwords, etc., will get backed up to the desktop if you have encryption set up. Makes it hard to just simply extract everything all at once. Prevents the evasion jailbreak, which at this point you can prevent that just by upgrading all your devices to 613. But the way that jailbreak worked is it created corrupt backup databases, restored them onto the system, and kind of built from there. So by encrypting the backups, you made that impossible to happen. The big disadvantage of having encrypted backups, if you forget the password, you can't restore. You can't even reset the password. Even if you've got, access to the device itself, you can't reset the password. If you want to restore, you got to just start all over with a fresh device. And then, again, if the device is unlocked or you've got an escrow key from a machine you've synced on, you can still extract individual files when the device is available. So Siri. Siri is kind of neat when it works right. I still use it a fair amount. You can configure it so that when your device is locked, Siri isn't available. When Siri is available when the device is locked, you can do certain things. You can look up some contacts. You can send SMS messages to people. You can even post to Twitter and Facebook. There might be other ways that information can leak out of the system, just again through various things that are exposed through Siri today or in the future. So there's actually an advantage to disabling Siri when the device is locked. Disadvantage of this is you've got to unlock to do any of those things, which means that if you're driving your car, you can't just simply say, hey, tell my wife I'm on my way. You've actually got to stop at a stoplight, unlock the phone, and then do it. So it definitely reduces a lot of the usefulness. But it also means that if you leave your phone somewhere, somebody can't just pick it up and say, I'm a jerk, and it gets texted out to the world. Or something more nefarious than that. So remote controls on the phone, with the Find My iPhone application, Find My Friends application, and mobile device management, you can perform some actions on the phone remotely. Some advantage of this, you can send a message to a device that's been locked, so it can actually pop up saying, hey, if you found this phone, please call such and such, and we'll get it back, and we'll give you a reward. You can geolocate the device using Find My iPhone. It's not a feature built in MDM, but you can figure out where it is on the map. You can remotely lock it, you can wipe it, etc. There are some limitations to this, however. The wipe message is not guaranteed and it's not acknowledged. So you send the wipe and it says, okay, I did that. Did it work? I don't know. When the device receives a wipe command from MDM, it just wipes itself. It doesn't even say, okay, great, I did it. It just wipes. And then, of course, a thief, if they are aware that you might wipe this, they remove the SIM, put it in a shielded bag, turn it off, whatever. Now the wipe message will never get to it anyway. So how useful that really is kind of up for debate. And of course, once it's been wiped, It's now no longer a member of your MDM system. It's no longer a member of Find My iPhone, so now you can't geolocate it or send messages. So it's kind of a last-ditch effort. All right, I'm done. I'm just going to wipe it. Another control that I have recommended, and I've got this on all my kids' devices, is not creating new accounts. You can actually, under the settings panel, you can restrict the creation of iCloud accounts, email accounts, etc. An advantage to this is that if you have corporate devices set up for corporate email, the end user can't add their Gmail account and now exfiltrate data just by cross-posting it to Gmail. So it gives you additional controls over inbound and outbound data. Disadvantages, it reduces the utility of the device for the end user. Sure, you've controlled it down to corporate specs, but now the user might not be as happy because they can't do as much with it. Also, these restrictions are just for built-in applications, for built-in mail, built-in Twitter, etc. Doesn't apply to third-party applications. You can still download a Twitter app and install a Twitter account that way, or download a Gmail app. Do they have a native Gmail app again? And add your credits to there. Finally, there's one that people don't really think about a lot, is auto join. You can actually have it configured to join networks that it knows automatically as soon as it sees them. And the best known example of this is actually ATT Wi-Fi. If you just take a phone out of the box, stock configuration, as soon as it finds a Wi-Fi access point that says ATT Wi-Fi, it connects to it right away. It even does that before you unlock it. So if you've got a phone that's just been rebooted, that's a way to get into it remotely, is to set up a Wi-Fi access point called ATT Wi-Fi, and the phone will connect to it. That's required for my Evil Maid attack. Ultimately, this gives an unnecessary attack surface. If you don't need it to connect to a network automatically, don't turn that on. An advantage of doing this, better awareness of what you're connecting to, and it removes that attack surface. Disadvantage, again, it's a reduction of device utility. And that's kind of a common theme across a lot of these controls, is it's a trade-off between being more secure and annoying your users. So lots of different controls. How do you manage all these things? There's ways that you can lock down controls that will actually prevent the end user from changing them. You can, for example, in the settings application, you can go to the restrictions section and set various controls in there and lock that section with a separate passcode. Unfortunately, that needs to be done manually at the device. You actually have to have the person unlock it. You set the things, set up a new password, and now security or IT has to associate that password with that device so that they can change things later. Huge configuration nightmare, obviously. You can also configure, put passwords on configuration profiles, or even set them not to be removed. But again, now you've got another passcode to manage, another system to worry about. You can install profiles over USB or over MDM, which is probably the best way to do it. But again, as I said before, you can remove the profiles by leaving MDM. So there are ways to lock them down. All the lockdown ways, all the methods of locking down configuration profiles have some drawbacks or limitations. In iOS 6, they added a couple additional features for profiles. You can actually set expiration dates to profiles. You can either have it expire on a particular given date, absolutely, or after a certain number of days, which is great because now you can grant somebody temporary access to a resource, grant them access to email by putting in the configuration and maybe certificate-based authentication or something like that. And then after 2 weeks, it goes away. Of course, the disadvantage is the user might not be ready for that to go away. If they've forgotten or if their task goes on longer than expected, you have to be sure to update that profile before it goes away. Otherwise, boom, it's all gone, and now you have to start over. And then we've talked about mobile device management. Remotely controlling device configuration, instantly update all of your devices across the enterprise. There are also additional controls available through MDM that aren't available locally. There are additional passcode settings, for example, in terms of length of the passcode, complexity, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, things like that, passcode history, additional VPNs. There's several features that are available through MDM profiles that are not available to the end user just in the settings app. But as I said before, it's not a high integrity protocol. There's ways to spoof data, spoof messages both directions, and the end user can always withdraw. So if you're using MDM, the settings that I recommend for MDM per se, just within the MDM system, is have the client sign the responses back up to the MDM server. This will provide some additional protection against spoofed responses. It's not perfect, but it's something. There's a flag that you can set to check out when removed. So if the user says, I'm done with this, hell with them, man, I'm going to extract, disenroll from MDM, the device will actually try to contact the server and say, okay, bye, I'm leaving. It doesn't have to do that, or the server doesn't have to respond before the device withdraws. So if they withdraw from MDM while they're not attached to a network, it'll just withdraw and the server will never know about it. They'll eventually figure it out just by, they won't get responses to all the queries that the MDM sends. But if they're playing nice, if the user's playing nice when they withdraw, then at least the server's notified as soon as they do it. You should also be sure that you're requiring some kind of authentication to enroll in MDM. You don't want to make sure that outsiders don't discover your MDM server and just basically connect to it and pull down your default profile and then maybe use that as a leg into either spoofing MDM services to other devices or just getting other information. If they can spoof the whole thing and they pull down the next, maybe they spoof an enrollment, now they just pull down the email profile, now they've got the name of your email server. So the method of how authentication is required for enrollment is going to vary from MDM vendor. That's not actually part of the spec, that's kind of before you enroll, but there's ways that you can have that set up so you have to enter one-time codes or Active Directory authentication, things like that. Once you've got MDM configured, here are some of the things we've recommended to customers to use MDM for. Things that are configuring connectivity between the devices and the corporate network. Wi-Fi settings, on-demand VPN, which apparently is changing now because of some lawsuit, patent nonsense. Using certificate-based authentication so that you can actually push out a cert that grants access to the Wi-Fi or to various corporate servers, etc. Set out controls for email, for contacts, all those different things. You can also have settings in there that prevent sending mail from other applications so that an application, for example, that has an opportunity to forward this document to email, that will go away. They won't be allowed to actually send that from those apps. You can also configure it so that you can't move messages between accounts. So I can't just simply take a message out of my corporate email account and drag it into my Gmail account. Those are all controls that are only available through MDM, by the way. And then when you have all this set up properly, if you revoke the profile, then the user loses access to all those assets. Or if the user leaves MDM, again, they lose access to those assets. There's some other restrictions you can put in there. Don't let the user accept an untrusted certificate. Disable things like photo stream in iCloud, force encrypted backups. These are all things that you should definitely consider using. I mentioned before the configurator app has something called supervised mode. This is a way that makes devices less personal and more corporate. Before I said that Apple's philosophy has been, it's a personal device, it's yours. Configurator and supervised mode kind of moves away from that gradually. It's good for things like small pools of devices, like in a classroom setting, or loaner devices that you might hand out to people on travel, things like that. Some advantages of this is you have very strong controls over syncing and configuration. They can be set up so that they can only sync to the device that supervises them. No other device, it just won't work at all. Forces consistent baseline across all devices. You hook it up, it immediately wipes it and builds a new standardized baseline on the device. Add some additional controls. But some of these controls probably too strong for easy management, and to do application installs, you have to be part of the volume purchase program. You can't just simply push out an app and have the user enter their own iTunes passcode to get it, something, even if you've got a gift code. You actually need volume purchase program to send out apps that way. But there are a couple of nice things that supervised mode gets you. You can force a global HTTP proxy so that all apps that use the standard HTTP protocols available within the API go through their proxy. But if your app opens a direct socket and does everything itself, then it doesn't have that. You can also disable Game Center, iMessage, removing applications, installation of configuration profiles. You can also put on a kiosk mode where the device is locked to a specific app. It's great if you're a restaurant and you want people to use iPads for ordering. You can use configurator to rebaseline all the iPads, and it can only do this app and they can't break out of it. There are a few things you just simply can't do. Some things can only happen at local control, only through the settings app. disabling creation of new accounts only happens in the settings app, though you can at least control that with restrictions and lock it down. But again, anything under restrictions, now you've got that additional passcode to worry about. Picture frame mode is something I've mentioned to customers now and then, because when an iPad is locked, you can actually have it go into a picture frame mode and just displays pictures from the photo library. If you have a screenshot with sensitive information, sooner or later that might come by on the screensaver mode. So definitely recommend that people disable that. But if you have the user with a passcode, they can always re-enable it. You cannot force that at a corporate level. Same thing for disabling message replies when locked, so you can't just simply swipe across a device that's locked and respond to an SMS. The user can always re-enable that. And then there's some things that are not available at all. You can't disable the microphone. The microphone on the iPad, at least, is pretty good. I actually put on a voice recorder app, started recording, locked the device, closed the smart cover, set it on my desk, and I recorded a telephone conversation on a speakerphone that was past a couple of cubes, through a doorway, and then around into an office. And it was very intelligible. So you could certainly start that recording, walk into a meeting, set your iPad down on the conference table. Nobody would ever know you've just recorded the entire meeting. You can't disable Wi-Fi or other networking. You can't completely disable social networking because, again, you can just install an app. You can't force membership in MDM because people can always leave MDM. Yes? You can do that. You can turn off different applications, both at the local settings through restrictions and through configuration profiles. You can disable things like, well, not YouTube anymore because they took away that native app. But you can disable the App Store. You can disable Safari. You can disable things like that. So you can prevent people from installing apps. The caveat on that, though, is that if you disable the App Store, not only do you disable the little icon that you tap on that's, users can go by apps, but you also disable the ability to push out an application through MDM. Apparently they go hand in hand, unless that's changed in the last release. I know I've tested that, and I want to say that no. I want to say that even installing an application over USB is disabled if App Store is disabled. It's good and it's bad, because again, you're disabling it from the user, but now you're also making it very difficult for the administrator to legitimately install things. So they have to remove the protections, install the app, put it back on. So, we're running out of time. So data vaults. Some applications just say to hell with the bundled apps, let's just put all the data in apps we trust, things like Good for Enterprise, etc., where you've got just a giant monolithic application that's got email and contacts and secure data storage and all that. Gives you a high level of control, gives you strong assurances. A lot of times they'll have very strong integration with your email server, etc. Disadvantages of this approach: additional infrastructure, all the additional support cost. You lose integration with other apps. So now everything's in this nice little self-contained application, but now you can't share that with other apps on the device, and you lose a lot of the potential bingo sheet word synergy that you might have amongst all the other applications, all the utility of the device. So again, you're losing some of the usefulness. If you do want to look into an app that's got dedicated silos, dedicated data vaults, make sure it's got dedicated servers and encrypted networks, obviously, encrypted network connectivity. You're looking for things that have got email and calendar and web browsers, file browsers, etc. Document isolation, so it's not easy for somebody to just simply copy the data out. A lot of these will have very robust remote management, so you can lock things out. You can remotely remove files from the user. Some may even have more advanced DRMs on them, so even an authorized user, after a week, the documents that they have they can't access anymore. Make sure also, obviously, that you enforce strong passcodes on these. And also make sure that the vault really is a vault, that they are actually encrypting the data like they say they are, and they're not just leaving it open. I reviewed a popular document viewer, supported multiple passcodes. You can do one at the application level, so as soon as you launch the app, it asks for another passcode. Even at the file level, so you can say all these files have a passcode on them, so you have to type in the passcode for that. The problem is there's only restricted access through the application itself. All the data remained on the device unencrypted, which means that I could have extracted all of them at any time with phone view. To their credit, they very clearly explained all of this and how all this worked in the documentation, but you had to look for it. And if you didn't look for it, you would probably have fairly reasonably assumed that everything was encrypted and protected when in fact it wasn't. Some quick development tips. You could easily fill a multi-day course with development tips on iOS. So some quick tips. Validate data that comes into the app. Even on a device, there's still possible to do some kinds of cross-site scripting and SQL injection against the data within the mobile application, or if the app connects to a remote server, through the app back to the server. Restrict sharing options. Your data is not secure if you load up a PDF in your protected viewer, and there's a little button in the corner, you tap that and it says send to iBooks. Oh, hey, now I'm on iBooks. And once you're in iBooks, send to mail. Oh, now it's in mail. You've just extracted the document. So be careful what kinds of built-in features, data sharing features you're making use of in the OS. Make sure you're using SSL securely. Reject expired certificates, self-signed certificates. Validate the certificate chain as well as you can. Even consider certificate pinning. That's something that drives me crazy with mobile applications. They own the server. They own the client. Let's pin it. They own the whole thing. There's no reason not to have strong identification of the certificates there. But that's something I still very rarely see. Of course, certificate pinning makes our jobs harder, but we'll live with that. Data retention, I talked about that. Obscure the screenshots before the application goes in the background. Do it for real. Replace it with a solid image, or maybe put your app logo or something in there. The UI preservation API, take care if you're going to use this. Make sure that sensitive fields are not being saved off. Remove any debugging code. NSLog data gets saved off to a little log file, and you may say, well, there's no log viewer on the phone. Well, there is as soon as you hook it up via USB and you go to a console in iPhone configuration utility. Now you can see a lot of log data that way. If you're saving something sensitive in the logs, the user might be able to pull stuff out of that. And of course, the data protection API. I said before, that costs you nothing to add. It's literally a word you add to the save message when you're actually sending out a save command. Make sure you're not putting anything sensitive in unprotected files. So if you have credentials, if you have account information, user IDs, don't put it in the preferences file for the application, because that's unencrypted and available to anybody with access to the device, to an unlocked device. Put them in the keychain, encrypt them, do something with them, just don't leave them lying around. So use the keychain, put all that stuff in there. The default accessible when unlocked is probably the best way to use it. If there's some apps that may need to work in the background, accessible after first unlock works. For very sensitive items, you can actually add this device only, and that will keep those keychain entries from being backed up to the desktop, even on an encrypted backup. So those never leave the device. So ultimately, what is our risk? When you think about it, there's really four main threats to data on an iOS device. Users doing something stupid, either accidentally or on purpose, or the loss of device either accidentally or having the device or its data specifically targeted by an adversary. Simple user mistakes like cross-posting emails, sharing docs, etc., leaving the device unlocked, those are all mitigated by the data vaults. Everything's going to be remediated to some degree by data vaults and dedicated applications and silos and such. Strong technical policies, passcodes, etc., some other controls, they're all good for guarding against user mistakes. Users deliberately doing something bad is much harder to protect against. If they are allowed to sync, they can sync to their home desktop. They can send files through email. They can have specialized apps either on the desktop or on the device, permanently on the desktop, that can help you get out data. These are mitigated somewhat by forcing encrypted backups, especially if you can set it up so the user doesn't know what the key is. Maybe all your devices sync to a centralized kiosk in the enterprise, and they just go there once a week and hook up and back up. But logistically, that starts to get problematic. Talked about supervised mode, but that's obviously very difficult to manage on a large scale. And again, protected data vaults. But even those are still not perfect. If the user has access to the device, they know their passcode, they know the passcode to get into the data vault. Ultimately, if they try hard enough, they can get it. They can reverse engineer the application, they can figure out how the keys are stored, now they've got their key and the other key, and they can decrypt everything. But it's a very, very high bar. The other two threats, loss of the device, simple theft. You leave the phone at a coffee shop or on a plane. Strong passcode protects against that. Ability to remotely wipe it protects against that. Ways to get around some of these, again, you can put it into a shielded boost bag and the wipe won't happen, remote wipe won't happen. Most of the time, if you lose a device in a coffee shop, whoever picked it up is just going to wipe it and sell it. So you're probably okay in that case. Targeted attacks are, again, harder. Somebody knows this device is yours. They're going to try real hard to get stuff on it. They can put malware on the PC where it's being synced to try and extract stuff if it's hooked up. They can do black bag jobs to actually break in and do things. Yes? I don't get into the malware world and the incident response world, so I don't know if there is malware out there, remote access kits that will go after data on a connected device, but that would certainly be something I'd look at. If I've got a remote access on a machine and it sees a USB go active and, oh, look, there's an iPad on it, I should have a list of applications that you know, hit this app, hit this app, hit this app. Oh, look, I'll grab that data. Makes sense. I don't know if anybody's done that yet or not. Honestly, I'd be surprised if some of the more advanced folks have not done that. I'm sure they are. Mitigations, again, protected data vaults, strong passcodes. Ultimately, just be careful what you're putting on there. Looking at this from use cases, general use, there's probably pretty low risk. If you're putting sensitive information on here, be careful, periodically review what you're using it for, what kind of apps you're putting on there, what kind of data you're using. If you're putting extremely sensitive information on there, use it sparingly. Consider wiping the device after each use. If you're going to travel to a risky location, bring a stripped-down device. Get a brand new device right out of a box. Only put the data on it that you really need. If you absolutely need access to some kind of email, maybe connect to a throwaway email account created just for that trip, things like that. Unfortunately, CEOs don't really like this advice, and they'll probably ignore it anyway, but at least you will have suggested it. Predicting the future, jailbreaking is going to keep getting harder. Vulnerability is going to be more difficult. But the biggest danger is still going to remain the device users. They've still got access to the device. Ultimately, if they try hard enough, they can still get access to the data on the device, so they can still pull stuff out. So the insider threat remains the biggest threat. Got a couple pages of references here, and whenever these slides get posted, if they're not posted on the website here, I'll make sure they're posted somewhere else, and I'll announce it on Twitter so you can get access to most of these. But most of these are pretty much well-known references you can find just by searching. So thank you all very much, and we're out of time, so if you have any questions, just hunt me down.